Hello, and welcome to another tutorial from ViewZen Labs on the Analytics platform. Today, we'll explore the grid. A grid is a tabular visual that organizes data into rows and columns in a logical order. It may also include headers and a totals row. Grids are a great choice to view and compare detailed data and exact values instead of visual representations. Grids work well with quantitative comparisons, where we are looking at many values for a single category. For example, in the African internal conflict dataset, which we are using for this tutorial, if we want to get a better understanding of the fatalities reported in each country by conflict type and location, the grid comes in handy. Here, fatalities is the column that contains numeric data. Country, location, year, and event type are columns that contain categorical data. Now let's learn how to create a grid. To create a grid, first switch to Designer mode from the Mode switch drop-down at the top right corner. After that, go to the ribbon at the top of the canvas, select the grid icon, and then click the location in the canvas where we want to place the grid. If there are no elements on the canvas, then the grid will be placed on the topmost left corner on the canvas. Let's dig deeper into the grid configuration. When we hover the cursor over the grid, we will see the Edit and Delete icons. We can delete the grid by clicking on the Delete icon. But while doing so, we should note that deletion cannot be reversed. If we want to access the Properties pane of the grid, we need to click on the Edit icon. The Properties pane always opens on the right-hand side, on top of the canvas. The Properties pane of the grid will allow us to adjust various settings for the grid, including the data source, columns to display, and layout and position of the grid. Another way to access the Properties pane is to click on the pen icon in the ribbon after selecting the grid. Let us now look at the property configurations one by one. Under Grid Properties, there are three tabs: the Data tab, the Format tab, and the Tooltips. We will first delve into the various functionalities under the Data tab. The Data tab allows us to add dynamic data from the available dataset into the grid as dimensions and measures. Before going into the details of the Data tab, let us first understand what are dimensions and measures. Dimensions typically contain qualitative values or non-numerical categories such as names, dates, or geographical data. And measures typically contain data fields we can measure, like numeric and quantitative values, such as income, prices, and so on. In the grid, data can be displayed either as an aggregate grid or a simple grid. Before beginning with the aggregate grid, let us first understand what are aggregates. In ViewZen Analytics, we can mathematically combine numeric data using a sum, average, count, minimum, variance, and much more. The result of that mathematical operation is an aggregate. We can even aggregate textual data, often called categorical data. If we try to aggregate a categorical field, it will count the occurrences of each category or count the distinct occurrences of each category. To display data as an aggregate grid, click on the pen icon on the top left corner of the Properties pane. Then you may have at most two options: Dataset and Context. A context will be only available if we have already created one for the dataset. To know more about context, please watch the tutorial on context. When working with the aggregate grid, you can choose between two options: Context and Dataset Assigned. If you prefer to use context as dimensions and calculated fields as measures, then select Context and then drag and drop the data fields to the dimensions, x-axis, and the measures, multiple y-axis. However, if you want to choose data fields from the dataset, then drag and drop the data fields to the dimensions and measures. After that, select the appropriate aggregation option for the selected measures from the dropdown. For example, let us explore the following data to understand some of the various aggregations used in the grid. Types of aggregation to be used in slide. Alternatively, If we require to show data without any aggregation, we can create a simple grid. Here, the grid will only show the exact data values for each column. To create a simple grid, click on the pen icon on the top left corner of the Properties pane and then drag and drop the data fields to the columns. Further, we can edit the name of the data field by double-clicking on the field name. To change the already added dimensions or measures or columns, either we can delete and add again, or we can click on the drop-down icon next to it and select the new data field. Additionally, we can change the order of the data fields in dimensions, measures, or columns by dragging the data field up or down. Now let's move to the Format tab, where we can create grid titles, design the appearance and layout, define actions and events, and configure customized color formatting. To begin with, we will go to the title configuration. The title in a grid is synonymous with the table name in a report. Here we can enter the title that we want to display on the top of the grid. In the title, we can enter or modify the title text in the Rich Text Editor. The formatting tool at the top of the Rich Text Editor contains the title formatting options. We can format the title in ways similar to what we do in Ms. Word. To change the formatting of the title, we have to just select the title and then choose the font style, font size, title color, title background, and alignment. We can emphasize the title text, bold, italics, or underline. We can strike through a word or sentence, and we can use a word or sentence as superscript or subscript. Further, we can even format each letter or word of a title. At times, we might want to use the same text or background color on multiple words. To achieve that, we can copy the hex code from the color box of the source title and paste it into the hex fields of all the destination titles. Additionally, we can define the title box properties using the title box formatting options located below the Rich Text Editor. These properties include position, background color, border, shadow, border radius, and the space between the title and title box padding. Similarly, we can configure a subtitle for the grid. A subtitle is a secondary or explanatory title. The creation and formatting of the subtitle are like that of the title. In the subtitle, we can enter or modify the subtitle text in the Rich Text Editor. We have the subtitle formatting options available above the Rich Text Editor. For example, we can choose a font style and font size. We can give the text or its background a color. We can align the text. We can emphasize the text, bold, italics, or underline. We can strike through a word or sentence, and we can use a word or sentence as superscript or subscript. Additionally, we can define the subtitle box properties using the subtitle box formatting options located below the Rich Text Editor. These properties include position, background color, border, shadow, border radius, and the space between the subtitle and subtitle box padding. Both title and subtitle are by default enabled, but we can disable them when required by sliding the toggle button next to their respective sections. In appearance, we can add the background color, shadow, and border to the grid and control the padding. For choosing the background color, click on the color box and then choose the required color, either by selecting from the color palette or by entering the RGB or HSLA or hex color codes. If we wish to use the same color in another grid that we have created, we can copy the hex code of the source grid and paste it into the hex code field in the respective destination grid. The primary text color for the grid in ViewZen Analytics is black. However, we can choose an alternative text color as well. When an alternative primary color is selected, the title, subtitle, and data in columns will appear in that color, except where a title, subtitle, or columns are assigned a text color under their respective property configuration. Using padding, we can set the amount of space between the contents of a cell and the cell's border. Additionally, we can also add shadows to the grid by specifying the offset values, blur radius, and color. Likewise, we can specify the width, style, color, and radius of the border of the grid. Viewer settings are additional options that appear only when the dashboard is opened in view mode. The different options under viewer settings allow the end users to interact with the grid component. For a grid, we can enable the end user to view the grid in full screen mode, filter data in each column, and sort the column data in either ascending or descending order. Besides, we can enable users to download the data displayed in the grid in XSLX format. By default, in the view mode, the icons for full screen and download are placed at the top right corner of the grid. However, we can modify where these icons appear on the grid by selecting a location from a given set of locations in the square box adjacent to the full screen and downloading options in the viewer settings. In the general settings, we can adjust the position and size of a grid. By specifying values for X and Y, we determine where on the screen the grid will be placed, and by entering values for width and height, we control how big or small the grid appears. Additionally, the component link feature enables us to integrate the grid into any portal or application seamlessly. Column formatting helps us to format each column based on our customization. The column formatting options allow us to change the font style, font color, font size, and background color for the selected columns. The column formatting property in ViewZen Analytics is designed in such a way that the formatting options for each dimension and measure are compartmentalized by their respective data field names, suffixed with dimension or measure labels with serial numbers. For example, dimension 1 country, dimension 2 year, measure 1 fatalities, and so on. This avoids any confusion, even if there are many dimensions or measures in the grid. The formatting options for dimensions are listed first, followed by measures in the order of their position in the grid. Moreover, for dimensions, which are mostly string data fields, we can turn on text wrap to allow long column headings to display across multiple lines. Further, we can also enable word breaks to set line breaks wherever the text would otherwise overflow its content box. Besides, we can also restrict the number of letters to be displayed in the column that we have chosen. For measures, which are numeric data fields, we can define the number formatting, where we can set the suffix, prefix, and decimals. The number formatting includes various options like crores, lakhs, thousand, billion, millions, Indian NS with suffix, Western NS with suffix, Indian NS with separator, and Western NS with separator. Color formatting is used to highlight the cells when the data in that cell meets specific criteria. Here, we can define color formatting for each dimension and measure in the grid. The color formatting property in ViewZen Analytics is designed in such a way that the formatting options for each dimension and measure are segregated by their respective data field names, suffixed with dimension or measure labels with serial numbers. For example, dimension 1 country, dimension 2 year, measure 1 fatalities, and so on. This avoids any confusion, even if there are many dimensions or measures in the grid. The formatting options for dimensions are listed first, followed by measures in the order of their position in the grid. To create a color formatting, first select a color scheme from available color schemes. Available color schemes for any data field depend on the type of data field used. For instance, if it is a numeric field, the available color schemes can include conditional as well as gradient scales. To create a color formatting using a conditional color scheme, select Conditional from the Color Scheme drop-down and then choose the Based On column, where we can specify the column on which the condition should be based. By default, the conditions are based on the same column itself. After that, under the Formatting rules, select Operator, Value, and Formatting Style. By default, the formatting rule is created for a null value, where the text color is chosen as red and the cell background color as blue. To change the existing formatting rule, click on the If the value is null formatting rule and update the value, operator, and formatting style. To add multiple conditions for the same column, click on Add another rule. Gradient scale offers a gradient that can range in color from the lowest to the highest value for the category. We can configure the color gradient and specify how to choose the cell background color based on the gradient. To create a color formatting using a gradient scale, select Gradient Scale from the Color Scheme drop-down and then choose the Based On column, where we can specify the column on which the condition should be based. By default, the conditions are based on the same column itself. After that, under the Color Scale, choose the color for the minimum and maximum value. The minimum value color applies to the lowest value in the range. The maximum value color applies to the highest value in the range. By default, the minimum value color is chosen as white, and the maximum value color is chosen as black. Further, if we want to create differentiated color gradients for specific values in the middle range of the color scale, click Add Color and then specify the value and color. Sorting allows us to organize the data in the grid in either ascending or descending order. With ViewZen Analytics, you have the option to add multiple columns for sorting. To achieve sorting, first select the columns or data fields in the order in which the sort order needs to be created. We can change the sort order of columns when required by dragging the data fields up or down. After that, choose the sort type, ascending or descending, for each selected column. For instance, if we have selected countries as the first column and fatalities as the second column to be sorted, and the sort type is selected as ascending for both columns, first countries would be sorted in ascending order. Following that, based on the ascending order of countries, fatalities would be sorted again in ascending order. The stacked header allows columns in a table to be grouped under a common header, which facilitates data organization and readability. To create a stacked header, click on Add Header and select columns to be clubbed under one header and then add the header name. We can add more headers by clicking on the Add Header button. A footer is a useful tool that allows you to add a footer to your grid. There are two types of footers available: standalone footer and column footer. The standalone footer is a footer that appears separately under the table, while the column footer appears directly below the corresponding column. To create a footer, start by selecting the columns you want to include from the grid. Once you've chosen the columns, click the drop-down arrow to set the label and choose an aggregation method. You can name the column as desired and select an aggregation option such as count, sum, or average to apply to that column. Under Actions and Events, we will learn to configure user-initiated events on the grid component that can set off certain actions. In ViewZen Analytics, any dashboard visual component can be configured to perform actions based on two different types of events originating from the same visual. In this case, different types of user-initiated events can be configured on the same visual component, and each such event can set off a certain action. For example, a user can click a bar on the bar chart, which can set off a drill-down action on the bar chart. Events originating from some other visual. In this case, this visual can set off a certain action even if the user initiates an event on a different visual component. For example, we may want to filter the first chart also when the user clicks a bar of a second bar chart. For a grid, both types of events originating from the same visual and events from another visual, are applicable and therefore can be configured. Let us first begin with events from this visual, where we can configure two events, the click event and double click event. Further, two properties need to be configured for the click event and double click event. Scope. Scope specifies the realm of this event. The scope or realm of an event can be a component or sheet. Scope helps us to limit or control the visual components that can act based on this event. It designates which all visual components can respond to this event with some action. Remember, we had mentioned that a visual can also respond to events originating from other components. If the scope of the event is a component, then only this visual component will respond to the event. If the scope of the event is sheet, then all visual components can respond to this event provided they have an associated action to perform. Action. Action is used to capture what the visual component is expected to do upon occurrence of the user-initiated event. Actions such as navigate to, freeze, drill down, filter, etc. can be set up depending upon the visual component. In the case of a grid, freeze, drill down, filter, and no action are currently allowed. Let us now move on to the events from this visual. In this, we have two events based on dimension, and all other events. For these two events, we have to configure the following property. Action. Action is used to capture what the visual component is expected to do upon occurrence of the user-initiated event. Actions such as navigate to, freeze, drill down, filter, etc. can be set up depending upon the visual component. In the case of a grid, freeze, drill down, filter, and no action are currently allowed. Now let's move to the tooltips. Tooltips are used to give extra explanations or instructions. Tooltips can be activated under the Tooltips tab of the Properties pane. Once activated, the tooltip will appear on hover over the visual component. Tooltips can be configured for different parts of a visual component. For the grid, we can configure Title Tooltip and Visual Tooltip. The Title Tooltip appears when we hover over the title of the grid. If we do not wish to display this tooltip, we can turn it off/deactivate using the toggle button next to Title Tooltip Settings. In the Title Tooltip, we can enter or modify the Title Tooltip text in the rich text editor. Further, we can format both the tooltip and the tooltip text for the grid title. The tooltip text can be formatted in various ways. For example, we can choose a font style and font size. We can give the text or its background a color. We can align the text. We can emphasize the text, bold, italics, or underline. We can strike through a word or sentence, and we can use a word or sentence as superscript or subscript. We can use the properties below the rich text area to format the tooltip. Tooltip formatting options help us position the title tooltip, put a border and style the border, and add padding or shadow. Similarly, we can configure the visual tooltip. The visual tooltip appears when we hover over on a visual component such as an image or a chart or grid. If we do not wish to display this tooltip, we can turn it off/deactivate using the toggle button next to Visual Tooltip Settings. Similar to the Title Tooltip, we can enter or modify the Visual Tooltip text in the rich text editor. Additionally, we can format both the Visual Tooltip and the Visual Tooltip text for the grid. For example, we can choose a font style and font size. We can give the text or its background a color. We can align the text. We can emphasize the text, bold, italics, or underline. We can strike through a word or sentence, and we can use a word or sentence as superscript or subscript. We can use the properties below the rich text area to format the tooltip. Tooltip formatting options help us position the visual tooltip, put a border and style the border, and add padding or shadow. Furthermore, if we need to filter the dynamic data that is displayed in the grid by appropriate conditions, we can use the filter option. The filter option can be accessed from the top right corner of the Properties pane. Once we click the filter icon, it will open the component filter pane with a Create Filter button. To create a filter, click on the Create Filter button and then enter the filter name and select the field name from the drop-down. Depending on the data type of the field name selected, the options would show respective operators in the drop-down. For instance, if the data type is a string, the options would show string operators. As soon as we have selected the field and the operator and entered the value or range to be filtered, the filter will be saved. Moreover, we can exclude the given range of filtered values from being displayed in the grid by sliding the toggle button inside the filter configuration to the right. By default, the grid includes the filtered range. We can add any number of filters to our dynamic data by clicking on the plus icon on the right-hand side of the value. Any filter that is created will be applied to the respective dynamic fields used in the grid. Further, in the component filter pane, we can view all the filters created and can also enable or disable any filter when required. After configuring the above steps, it's crucial to save these changes in the Properties pane. This ensures that the configured properties are applied and persist across sessions. Click on the Save button within the Properties pane to save the changes. Once saved, the settings get applied. Now, if we edit the grid again, the newly applied settings will appear in the Properties pane. If we close the Properties pane without saving the changes, the unsaved changes will still be available until either the changes are applied, save changes, or discarded, cancel changes. This final step completes the setup and configuration of the grid component.